Hi there, I'm Tony Lee, and this is Hot Flasher, your daily menopause podcast that serves up fresh news, research, and wellness tips. I've built a daily news pipeline to find the latest on women's health and menopause research. Allow me to introduce my co-host Nykki, who handles the headlines. Take it away, Nykki.
Thanks, Tony. We've got some genuinely interesting research to get through today. A new study published in PubMed, Peng J, 2026, compared integrated TCM acupuncture with SSRIs for treating depression in perimenopausal women. Specifically, it looked at how changes in three biomarkers, estradiol, serotonin, and BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, correlated with antidepressant response in each group. That's actually a smart framing for a study. One of the things that makes perimenopausal depression its own clinical category, distinct from depression at other life stages, is that it's tangled up with hormonal fluctuation. Estradiol doesn't just affect your ovaries, it interacts with serotonin signaling and with BDNF, which is involved in neuroplasticity and mood regulation. So asking whether those biomarkers move differently depending on treatment is a reasonable question to ask. Here's where I want to slow down though, because the framing of this kind of study tends to outrun the actual design. This is a retrospective cohort study. That means researchers looked back at patient records. They did not randomly assign anyone to acupuncture or SSRIs. The people who received TCM acupuncture were probably different from the SSRI group in ways the study can't fully account for: health beliefs, access, severity of symptoms, at baseline, what else they were doing for their health. All of that is baked into a retrospective design, and there's no way to unbake it. That doesn't make the study worthless. Retrospective cohort data can be genuinely useful. It helps identify patterns worth investigating in a more rigorous design. But it cannot establish that one treatment caused better outcomes than the other, no matter how clean the numbers look. And that distinction matters enormously when the finding is going to get picked up as acupuncture beats SSRIs for menopause depression. The underlying science here is worth taking seriously. The connection between estradiol decline and disrupted serotonin and BDNF signaling is real and documented. It's the kind of mechanistic evidence you'd find in clinical databases like Open Evidence, the kind your doctor would reference when trying to understand why perimenopausal depression doesn't always respond the same way as depression in other populations. That biological context is legitimate. What a retrospective cohort can't tell you is which treatment to choose or why one might work better for you specifically. My actual position on this: acupuncture for perimenopausal depression is not implausible. There's a small but growing body of evidence suggesting it may have some benefit. And for women who can't or won't take SSRIs, that matters. What I'm skeptical of is the leap from interesting biomarker correlations in a retrospective data set to integrated TCM acupuncture is an effective alternative. The research isn't there yet. It's worth watching, not worth announcing. There's a second study out right now that I think deserves more attention than it's probably getting. Yang Y, 2026, a qualitative study on self-management experience and needs among postmenopausal women with metabolic dysfunction-associated steatotic liver disease. MASLD for short, and yes, that acronym replaced what used to be called NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, a few years ago. Here's why this lands in the menopause conversation, and not just the gastroenterology one. Estrogen is protective for the liver. It influences how fat is metabolized and stored. When estrogen levels drop after menopause, that protection goes with it, and the risk for MASLD rises meaningfully. It's one of those menopause-related health shifts that rarely comes up in the 5-minute appointment because it doesn't announce itself with a hot flash. It builds quietly. What this study did was qualitative, meaning instead of measuring biomarkers or comparing drug efficacy, it sat with postmenopausal women who have MASLD and asked them about their experience managing it. What do they find hard? What do they need? What's missing from the care they're receiving? I want to say something in defense of qualitative research for a moment, because it gets dismissed sometimes as soft science compared to randomized trials. For understanding how women actually navigate a chronic condition, what barriers they hit, what support they're missing, why they don't follow through on recommendations, qualitative methods are exactly the right tool. A randomized trial can't answer those questions. This can. The study found, broadly, that these women feel unsupported and underprepared. They're managing a condition that requires sustained lifestyle change, diet, physical activity, metabolic monitoring, but the guidance they're receiving doesn't account for the specific context of postmenopause. The metabolic shift that comes with estrogen loss changes the terrain. Generic liver disease self-management advice doesn't map cleanly onto it. That's a medical system problem as much as it's a research gap. MASLD in postmenopausal women sits at an intersection. It's menopause medicine and hepatology and metabolic medicine all at once, and no single specialty has really claimed it. Women end up in the middle of that gap. Strength training and protein intake, two things the lifestyle evidence consistently supports for postmenopausal metabolic health, are likely relevant here. But this study wasn't designed to test interventions, so I'm not going to overreach and connect those dots as if it's proven. What the study does clearly establish is that postmenopausal women with MASLD are telling clinicians, we need more, and what we're getting isn't built for us. That's worth hearing. The third piece of research today shifts the focus significantly. Young-ji published August 31st, 2026, a study on the psychological impact of BRCA genetic testing, analysing how positive and negative effect change depending on test results. BRCA testing sits in the menopause conversation for a specific reason. A BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutation dramatically changes the conversation about HRT. Women who carry one of these mutations and undergo risk-reducing surgery, bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, surgical menopause, face a much more abrupt and physiologically significant menopause than natural menopause. The decisions that follow about hormone therapy, about cancer surveillance, about managing a sudden menopause, often in their 30s or 40s, are high stakes in a way that requires its own framework entirely. So what does this study actually say? It looked at psychological outcomes, specifically positive and negative affect, which are measures of emotional state, and tracked how they changed based on whether someone received a positive or negative test result. The finding that I keep coming back to is this: a negative result, meaning no mutation detected, does not simply reset someone to their pre-testing emotional baseline. It produces its own psychological effect. There's relief, yes, but also sometimes a kind of complicated survivor guilt or unresolved anxiety about the uncertainty that still exists. The study found measurable changes in effect, even among those who got the news they were hoping for. That's not a surprising finding if you've spent any time reading the lived experience literature around genetic testing, but it's useful to have it quantified and documented. It pushes back against the assumption built into a lot of clinical workflows, which is that the negative result conversation is essentially administrative. Tell them they're clear, send them home. The data here suggests the psychological work isn't done at that point. For positive results, the picture is what you'd expect, and also more complicated than that. Short-term distress, yes, but some research, and this study touches on it, finds that having an answer, even an unwanted one, can paradoxically support longer-term psychological adjustment because it enables action. Uncertainty is its own burden. The limitation I'd flag here is that effect measures at a single point in time, or even across a few time points, don't fully capture the trajectory of how people process this information over months and years. But as a snapshot of the immediate psychological terrain around testing, it's credible and clinically useful data. What this argues for, practically, is that genetic counselling, not just genetic testing, needs to be treated as essential and ongoing, not optional and one time. The result is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. That's true whether the result is positive or negative.
Thanks for listening to Hot Flasher. We're back tomorrow with more, so don't forget to subscribe. See you tomorrow.